My name is Daniel, and from the earliest memories I can recall, my life has been deeply shaped by the principles of Islam. I was born into a family that lived and breathed their faith, where religion wasn't merely a part of life but the very essence of our existence. Every day, without fail, I would perform my 5 daily prayers, reciting verses from the Quran with heartfelt devotion. The mosque was my refuge, my place of peace and guidance. It was there that I felt closest to Allah, certain that my devotion to Him would lead me to salvation in the hereafter. My perspective on life was largely formed by the Quran and the teachings of Prophet Muhammad. I immersed myself in the study of hadiths, memorizing important surahs, and continually sought knowledge in Islamic scholarship. Life felt purposeful, grounded in the belief that I was treading the straight path, as the Quran instructed. Yet, despite my unwavering faith, moments of doubt would sometimes creep in. Late at night, in the quiet solitude of my room, I would lie awake, pondering the nature of God and the concept of salvation promised in the Quran. I often wondered, would my good deeds outweigh my sins on the day of judgment? What if, despite my sincere efforts, I hadn't done enough? These fleeting doubts were quickly silenced by prayer and the comfort of religious study, but they lingered, like distant whispers in the back of my mind. I had always respected other faiths, and as a theology student, I found it fascinating to explore different religious beliefs, especially Christianity. Still, I considered Christianity flawed. The idea that Jesus was the Son of God seemed impossible to reconcile. While I respected Jesus as a prophet, he was just that, a prophet, no different from others who had come before him. The doctrine of the Trinity was unfathomable to me, and the notion of salvation by grace alone seemed like an easy way out, diminishing the significance of personal effort and accountability. For years, I held firm to these convictions, engaging in debates with Christians whenever the opportunity arose. I felt confident in my stance, using the Quran to disprove what I viewed as contradictions in the Bible. My faith seemed unshakable, and I took pride in my ability to defend Islam with reason and logic. But even in my certainty, the doubts never fully disappeared. It wasn't until a trip to visit family in another city that everything began to unravel. The day started like any other. I woke up early for Fajr prayer, recited my usual supplications, and spent the morning conversing with my younger brother about theology. But as the day wore on, I began to feel unwell. At first, it was just a slight discomfort in my chest, something I dismissed as nothing serious. But by evening, the discomfort had escalated into an intense, sharp pain that made it difficult to breathe. "Daniel, we're going to the hospital," my brother said firmly, grabbing his car keys. I protested, as I always did about medical matters. "It's probably just indigestion," I said. "I'll be fine." But the pain only worsened, and by the time we reached the emergency room, I could barely stand. The doctors quickly assessed me, running tests while their expressions grew more serious with every passing minute. Within the hour, I found myself hooked up to machines, the doctors telling me that I was having a severe heart attack. My mind raced. A heart attack at my age? It didn't make sense. I had always taken care of myself, eating healthily, exercising regularly, and of course, maintaining my prayers. How could this be happening to me? As the doctors worked to stabilize me, fear gripped my heart in a way I had never experienced. I thought about my family, my life, and the prayers I hadn't yet offered. Was this how it was all going to end? Would I meet my Creator unprepared and uncertain? The room around me seemed to blur, the voices of the medical team fading away. The crushing weight in my chest grew unbearable, and each breath became a struggle. I whispered the Shahada, the declaration of faith, over and over again, clinging to the one thing I had always believed would save me. The darkness began to take over, and for a brief moment, everything faded. No pain, no sound, no light, just silence. But in that silence, I sensed something. Someone. There was a presence, waiting for me. Then, slowly, the darkness shifted. My surroundings dissolved, and I felt a strange sense of anticipation as if I was on the brink of an unknown journey. I didn't know what awaited me, but there was one undeniable truth. My life was about to change forever. When I opened my eyes, or what felt like my eyes, I realized I wasn't in my body anymore. I was floating, weightless. I could see my form lying on the hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses working feverishly. My chest was still rising and falling in shallow breaths, the machines beeping in irregular patterns. My brother stood nearby, his face pale and filled with worry, his knuckles white from gripping the edge of a chair. Surprisingly, I didn't feel panic. Instead, I was oddly calm, as though I was watching the scene unfold from a distance. I tried to speak, to call out to my brother, to reassure him, but no sound came from me. I wasn't even sure I had a mouth anymore. I wasn't in pain, but I felt a strange detachment, like I was observing everything without being able to interact. What is happening? I thought. Am I dead? The idea sent a shiver through me. I had always believed that after death, the soul would be judged and its fate decided. But this wasn't how I imagined it. There were no angels, no grand judgment. Just me, floating above my own body, suspended in confusion and stillness. Then I saw it, a light. But not like any light I had ever seen. It wasn't blinding or harsh. Instead, it radiated an intensity that seemed to pierce straight through me. It pulsed, soft but persistent, growing brighter with every passing moment. It wasn't coming from the room around me, but from somewhere beyond, distant, yet impossibly close. I felt its pull, like an irresistible force, reaching deep into the very core of whatever I had become. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Every instinct told me to resist, to stay grounded in the reality I had known. But the light called to me, not with words, but with a presence so powerful, so deep, that it felt as though it was part of me. The world around me began to fade, and with it, the sounds of the monitors, the voices of the doctors, and even the sight of my brother. All that remained was the light, vast, all-encompassing, and eternal. If you are not subscribed, I recommend subscribing and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. I felt it, this force pulling me forward, like a soft, irresistible current sweeping me into its depths. At first, I fought against it, desperate to hold on to what I knew, to what I understood. But no matter how hard I tried to resist, I couldn't stop myself from moving forward. The pull wasn't violent, nor was it harsh. It wasn't an overwhelming force. Instead, it was gentle, like a calm invitation that I couldn't deny. It was the kind of pull that came from within, stirring something deep inside me, something I hadn't known was there, awakening a part of me I had long forgotten. As I drifted closer, the light ahead became brighter, so much so that it hurt my eyes at first. But it wasn't the kind of painful brightness you feel from the sun. It was different, more profound. This was a light that didn't just reach my eyes but seemed to penetrate deep into my very being. As I neared it, something shifted within me. A warmth began to spread, not just on the surface, but to my core. It wasn't like the warmth of the sun kissing my skin on a hot day, nor the warmth of a fire in winter. No, this warmth was different. It was soothing and pure, a warmth that comforted every ounce of my being. It was an embrace that filled me in a way nothing ever had before. But there was something more, something beneath that surface warmth. It was powerful, almost too powerful to grasp at first. The heat itself felt like love, like a deep, unspoken connection to the very essence of life itself, something I hadn't known I needed but realized I could never live without. The light wasn't something to be simply seen, it was something to be felt, something alive. It hummed with an energy that resonated with me on a level I had never experienced. It was as if the light wasn't just a thing but a presence, a living, breathing entity that called to me. "What is this?" I whispered, but the question felt almost laughable in the face of such undeniable brilliance. As though any inquiry would be small, insignificant, in the presence of such overwhelming grandeur. "Where am I going?" I asked again, though deep down, I already knew I was heading somewhere I had always known in the deepest part of me, but had never been able to put into words. A deep sense of fear crept up my spine, tightening my chest. I had been raised with so many beliefs, with so many teachings, that I thought I understood what was real and true. My whole life, I had been taught to trust in the sacred words of the Quran, in the faith I had known since childhood. Yet here I was, standing on the edge of something so foreign, something that didn't fit into the neat box I had always believed in. This wasn't part of anything I had ever learned or experienced before, and that terrified me. I wasn't prepared for this moment. I wasn't prepared for whatever was happening. But then, something within me, something deeper than fear, responded. There was an undeniable truth that I couldn't ignore. This light was calling me. It wasn't pulling me against my will. It was inviting me, beckoning me closer with a love that was beyond comprehension. And as much as my mind tried to argue, there was a part of me that knew this wasn't just some trick, some illusion. This wasn't a random, fleeting moment. This was something divine. Something so far beyond my understanding that it shattered everything I thought I knew. It was bigger than religion, bigger than faith itself. It was the truth, raw and unfiltered. As I stepped closer, the warmth intensified. It surrounded me, wrapping me in a blanket of peace so complete, so pure, that I almost felt I could melt into it. It was the kind of peace I had only ever imagined, the kind I had always hoped for but never believed I would experience in my lifetime. In that moment, every worry, every doubt, every ounce of fear I had carried with me dissolved. Gone. Vanished without a trace. There was no room for insecurity, guilt, or anger. It was as though the very fabric of my soul was cleansed, washed in a light so profound that I could no longer tell where I ended and the light began. For the first time in my life, I was truly at peace. Yet, as comforting as it was, I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense that this moment was more than just peace. It was a reckoning, a turning point. It was a threshold, one that separated who I had been from who I was about to become. The light wasn't a destination, it was a doorway, and I was standing at its threshold, uncertain of what awaited me on the other side. I hesitated, standing at the edge, feeling small and unworthy, like I didn't belong in the presence of something so magnificent. What was waiting for me beyond this light? What did I truly deserve? I was flooded with questions. Questions I had no answers to, but the light seemed to respond, not in words but in its very presence. It reassured me, calmed me, and somehow told me that I was ready. With a breath, deep and full of emotion, I stepped through. I let go of everything that held me back. And as I passed through the light, something unimaginable happened. The warmth, the peace, the power, all of it wrapped around me like a cloak. I was consumed, but in the most beautiful way. I felt cradled in something far greater than myself, far greater than anything I had ever known. The very light around me seemed to pulse, alive with an energy that was beyond anything I could comprehend. And I knew, in that moment, I was standing in the presence of something infinite, something far beyond my understanding. And then, there he was. The figure emerged from the light, standing before me in a form that was almost too pure to behold. He was cloaked in radiance, his figure as brilliant as the light itself, yet somehow, he was more than the light. His presence filled me with awe, with wonder, with a fear I had never known before. But there was no judgment in his gaze, only a depth of understanding that reached into the very core of my being. It was as though he could see everything, everything I had ever been, every thought, every secret, every sin, every hope. I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing, couldn't place it in any context that I knew. But I didn't need to. I knew, with every fiber of my being, who he was. He didn't need to say a word. The light, the warmth, the peace, they told me everything. This was the Creator, the one who had always been there, watching, guiding, testing me. And for the first time, I felt completely naked, exposed in a way I had never experienced before. All my life, I had been taught that my deeds would be weighed and that I would be judged for my actions. But here, in this presence, there was no need for judgment. I didn't have to prove myself. I didn't need to do anything to earn this moment. I was already known. I was already seen. "Who are you?" I asked, though I knew the answer. The figure smiled at me, a smile so full of compassion, of love, that it washed over me like a wave. And in that moment I knew there were no more questions left to ask. I didn't need to debate, study, or search for answers. I didn't need to understand every detail. I simply knew. I knew that I was standing in the presence of the divine. And in that moment, everything fell into place. The light, the peace, the warmth, it all made sense. It was the truth I had been searching for my entire life. And for the first time, I felt complete. I felt the weight of the moment, more profound than any I had ever experienced. It pressed down on me like a 1,000-pound anchor, and yet it was not oppressive. It was as though the entire universe, with all its vastness and mystery, had come together just for this single instant. Every belief I had clung to for years, every foundation I had built my life upon, suddenly seemed so small. I could almost feel them disintegrating, breaking apart like grains of sand slipping through my fingers. What I thought I knew, what I had always believed, was no longer enough. It felt as though the very ground beneath me was shifting, and yet, there was an undeniable sense of stillness, as if everything in my world had paused for this singular revelation. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. I had always thought faith was about following a set of rules, about doing what was right and earning favor from the divine. I had spent so many years striving, praying, fasting, and trying to live up to some unattainable ideal. I had convinced myself that if I just followed the path, if I did enough, I could reach some kind of divine approval. But standing there, in the presence of Jesus, it all came crashing down. Faith was not about what I could do. It wasn't about earning or proving anything. It was about trust. Trust in the love and mercy of the Creator, trust in a relationship far beyond my understanding. His presence was not one of judgment or condemnation. It was one of pure, unconditional love. It was gentle yet powerful, like a warm embrace that held me in a space of perfect acceptance. His gaze never wavered from me, and I felt as though he saw every part of me, every fear, every doubt, every secret, and every hope. I was not just another soul to be judged. I was a beloved child, seen and known by the Creator. And in that gaze, I saw something I had never truly seen before. The truth that faith was not about being perfect or adhering to a rigid set of rules. It was about surrendering to love. The love of the one who created me, who knew my deepest fears and yet accepted me, flaws and all. When he asked me to accept his gift, I felt the weight of the decision settle deep into my chest. My mind raced with questions. Questions about the life I had lived, about the things I had done, about the future that stretched out before me. Could I truly surrender all that I had known for something that felt so new, so unfamiliar? The choice felt impossibly huge, like standing at the edge of a great precipice, unsure of what lay beyond. But at that moment, I understood that it wasn't a question of worthiness or knowledge. It wasn't about my ability to understand every detail or to have all the answers. It was about my willingness to open my heart, to trust in the one who had always been there, even when I didn't know it. There was no fear in my heart as I made my decision. It was not the fear of the unknown, nor the fear of what I might lose. It was the fear of missing out on something infinitely greater. The moment I allowed myself to feel the depth of his love, all the fears, doubts, and insecurities that had held me captive for so long melted away. I knew, in the deepest part of my soul, that everything I had ever believed was being called into question for a reason. And that reason was not to condemn me, it was to free me. Yes, I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion, more raw than I had ever felt before. Yes, I accept. And with that single word, a flood of peace washed over me. It was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't just a calming sense of relief, it was a complete and utter peace, deep in my bones, that transcended anything I had ever experienced. I felt as though my very soul was being cradled in the hands of the divine. The weight of the world, the burdens I had carried for so long, all seemed to dissolve. I was no longer bound by the endless striving, the need to prove myself, to be good enough. I was enough, simply as I was. The warmth that had wrapped itself around me grew even stronger, embracing me in ways I couldn't explain. It was as though I had finally come home. The light around me intensified, becoming brighter and more alive, as though it were pulsating with energy, with life, with love. It wasn't just light, it was a presence. It was the divine, enveloping me completely. The entire space felt alive, charged with the essence of the Creator. I was no longer alone. The light was no longer something outside of me, it was a part of me, and I was a part of it. And then, amid the overwhelming light, I saw him. At first, it was difficult to comprehend what I was seeing. A figure, not defined by earthly features, but clothed in the very radiance that surrounded us. He stood before me, but he was not distant. He was near, so near that I could feel his presence, His love, filling every corner of my being. His gaze pierced through me, but not with judgment or scorn. It was as though he was looking right into the depths of my soul, seeing everything, every mistake, every fear, every tear, and every hope. And yet, in that gaze, I felt nothing but acceptance. I felt completely seen, completely known, and completely loved. I knew, in that instant, who he was. I didn't need to be told. The light, the peace, the sense of connection, everything pointed to the truth. This was the Creator. This was the one who had always been with me, even when I hadn't realized it. The one who had been guiding me, watching over me, loving me, even in my moments of doubt. There was no need for words. His presence spoke more deeply than anything I could ever understand. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I had spent my life trying to prove my worth, trying to be good enough, trying to earn something that could never be earned. I had struggled with my insecurities, doubts, and fears, all while seeking approval from the world, from others, and even from myself. But here, in this divine presence, I realized that I didn't need to prove anything. The Creator knew me, knew my heart, and that was all that mattered. I felt the weight of His love as He spoke. His voice soft but filled with an authority that left no room for doubt. "You are loved," He said, His voice echoing in my heart. "You are forgiven." Those words, simple yet profound, penetrated every part of me. They weren't just words, they were a declaration. A declaration that I was not defined by my mistakes, by my past, or by my failures. I was defined by my relationship with the Creator. I was defined by love. And in that moment, I realized that I had been seeking that love all my life, without even knowing it. Tears streamed down my face, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming grace that had washed over me. Everything, my past, my present, my future, was now seen through the lens of divine love. And I knew, without a doubt, that I was exactly where I was meant to be. With Him, in His love, forever. I took a shallow breath, trying to adjust to the physical world around me, the sharpness of reality cutting through the softness of the vision I had just experienced. It felt like a dream, surreal and distant, but the presence of Jesus, His love, His purpose, it was all so vivid, so real. How could I return to a life that felt so mundane, so ordinary, after glimpsing the infinite? How could I explain what had happened? How could I even begin to convey the depths of what I had seen when no one would truly understand? The sterile walls of the hospital room, the beeping of machines, the hurried movements of doctors and nurses. It was all a stark contrast to the peace I had just felt. The warmth of heaven had surrounded me, and now I was back in a cold, clinical world. The transition was jarring, as though I had slipped between two different realities, and the weight of it all felt unbearable. Ahmed, my brother's voice pulled me back to the present. His hand still gripping mine as if he were afraid to let go. His eyes were wide, searching, desperate for me to respond, to assure him that I was truly here, truly alive. He had been there, I realized, watching me fight for my life, waiting for some sign that I would wake up. How could I explain to him the unimaginable? How could I make him understand that I had just stood in the presence of the divine, seen the reality of heaven and hell, and heard the call to go back and share the truth? I'm here, I whispered, my voice cracking as I struggled to form the words. It felt like a lifetime since I had spoken, and the air tasted strange in my lungs, thick with the remnants of what I had left behind. My body felt so fragile, like it was no longer mine, as though I had been thrust back into a shell I didn't fully recognize. I could see the confusion in my brother's eyes, the disbelief, but also the overwhelming relief. He had watched me slip away, watched as my pulse had slowed, as my life had seemed to slip through his fingers. And now, against all odds, I was back. But I wasn't the same. I couldn't be. The doctors were still speaking in hushed tones, exchanging baffled looks. "We don't understand how this is possible," one of them said, voice tinged with awe. "His vitals were declining rapidly. We thought he was gone." Another doctor, who had been monitoring my heart, looked at the screen again in disbelief. "This is nothing short of a miracle." The word lingered in the air like an echo, filling the room with a strange reverence. Miracle. I had heard the word before, but never had it felt so real. Never had it carried such weight, such significance. I had been part of something far greater than any miracle I had ever known. I had touched eternity, felt the love of God envelop me, and now I was here, alive. It was both humbling and overwhelming. My brother leaned in closer, his eyes full of emotion. "Ahmed, you have no idea. You were gone. We thought we'd lost you." His voice broke, and I could feel his grip tightening on my hand as if he were afraid I might slip away again. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry as if the words were trapped inside me, unable to break free. What could I say? What could I possibly tell him about what I had experienced, about the truth I had seen, the love I had felt? He would never understand. How could he? How could anyone? I closed my eyes, trying to steady my racing thoughts. I could still feel the presence of Jesus with me, his voice echoing in my mind. "There is more for you to do. Go, share the truth." Those words filled me with a sense of purpose, a mission I couldn't ignore. The call was clear. I had been shown the way, and now I had to share it. But how? Where would I even begin? I opened my eyes again, and my brother was still there, watching me with a mix of disbelief and relief. His tears had not stopped, but now there was something else in his gaze, a kind of quiet hope. He had been by my side through everything, watching me struggle, hoping for a miracle, and now, here I was. Alive. But the miracle was not just that I was back. It was that I had been given a new purpose, a new understanding of life and death, of heaven and hell, of love and grace. How could I share this? I thought to myself, how could I make anyone understand? But Jesus had spoken with such clarity, such certainty. I had been given a message, a truth to carry with me for the rest of my life. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about living with purpose, living with the understanding that the choices we make, the love we embrace, and the truth we carry have eternal consequences. I wasn't meant to just exist in this world. I was meant to share what I had seen, to testify to the truth I had encountered, no matter how difficult or impossible it seemed. The room around me began to settle, the doctors speaking with less urgency as my vitals seemed to stabilize. I could hear the muffled voices of my family outside, their concern giving way to relief. But inside, my heart was heavy with the knowledge of what I had just witnessed, with the responsibility I now carried. My brother's voice broke through my thoughts again. "Ahmed, are you okay? Do you remember what happened?" I nodded weakly, still trying to process it all. I remember everything," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. I could feel the tears gathering again, not from fear or sadness, but from the overwhelming reality of what I had experienced. I saw Jesus. I saw heaven and hell. And I know the truth. My brother's eyes widened with astonishment. He didn't know what to say, and I didn't know how to explain. But as I looked into his eyes, I knew that somehow, someday, I would find the words. And when I did, the truth I had seen, the love I had felt, would be shared with everyone willing to listen. For now, though, I just held his hand and allowed myself to rest, knowing that my journey was far from over. It had only just begun. As the hours stretched on, I found myself trapped between two worlds, one that was rooted in everything I had known, and the other, an overwhelming revelation that had turned my entire understanding of faith upside down. The encounter with Jesus had left me changed in ways I couldn't fully explain, but the fear of what would happen if I shared it with anyone was paralyzing. Would my family accept this truth? Would they understand the magnitude of the vision I had experienced? Or would they see it as a betrayal of everything they had taught me? If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. Hassan was the first person I trusted enough to share what had happened. I had known him since childhood, and despite the different paths we had walked in life, there was a bond between us that transcended religious beliefs. He was the one who had always listened without judgment, the one who stood by me through every trial, every moment of doubt. Yet, this was different. This wasn't just about struggling with day-to-day challenges. This was about something that could shake the very foundation of my life. I had invited him over to my apartment that evening, knowing that I needed to say it out loud, to have someone else hear it, even if I was terrified of the consequences. The dim lighting of my living room created an almost surreal atmosphere, as if it could somehow soften the weight of what I was about to confess. As we sat across from each other, I could see the concern etched on his face, the way his eyes never left mine, as though waiting for me to say the words that would explain everything. "Hassan," I began, my voice unsteady, "I've been through something. I don't know how to explain it. It's beyond what I can fully understand, but I have to tell you." His eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded, a silent encouragement for me to continue. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush me to say anything more than I was ready to. That alone gave me a small sense of calm. I saw Jesus," I said, the words hanging between us, the weight of them pressing down on me. "Not in a dream, not in some vision. I saw him. He spoke to me, and he called me to share the truth." I stopped there, watching Hassan's face for any sign of disbelief or judgment. But he said nothing, just waiting for me to continue. "I know this sounds crazy, but what I saw, what I felt, was real. I saw heaven. I saw hell. I felt the love and the peace that he promised. He told me to go and share what I've learned." I paused, trying to absorb the gravity of what I had just shared. I had always thought I could explain everything away, that there was always a logical reason for everything. But this was different. This experience didn't fit into any box of understanding I had known. Hassan's face remained unreadable for a moment, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I had been preparing for rejection, for anger, for disbelief, but not for what came next. He leaned forward, his expression softening as he looked me in the eye. "Ahmed," he said quietly, his voice gentle, "this is a lot to take in. I won't pretend that I understand what you're feeling, but I know you. You wouldn't say something like this unless you were certain. And if this is what you believe now, I have to respect that." The relief I felt at that moment was almost overwhelming. For the first time since my encounter, I felt like I wasn't completely alone with this experience. But even as Hassan gave me his support, the fear returned in full force. The fear of what my family, my community, would think if they knew. The fear of losing everything that had once been my identity. "I don't know what to do, Hassan," I admitted, my voice breaking with the weight of it all. "I can't keep this inside forever. But I don't know how to tell my family. I don't know how to tell them that everything I've believed might not be the full truth." Hassan paused for a long time, as if carefully weighing his words. Finally, he spoke. "I don't have the answers, Ahmed," he said, his tone filled with both concern and wisdom. "But I know that whatever path you choose, it has to be true to what you believe in your heart. It won't be easy, but I believe in you. I believe you'll find the strength to face whatever comes next." The comfort in his words didn't erase the gnawing fear inside me, but it did offer me a small shred of hope. Maybe this wasn't just a burden to bear alone. Maybe there was a way to move forward without losing everything. As the evening wore on and Hassan left, I found myself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the overwhelming mix of emotions that had flooded me since my encounter. The words of Jesus echoed in my mind. "Go, Ahmed, share the truth. I will be with you always." I couldn't ignore them. The sense of responsibility I felt, the urgency in his voice, wasn't something I could easily dismiss. But still, the thought of sharing this truth, especially with my family, filled me with dread. I didn't know how to reconcile the man I had been with the man I was becoming. The person who had stood before Jesus, accepted his love, and heard his call. Was he the same as the person lying in this bed, afraid of what the truth might cost? I thought about my mother, my father, and my siblings. How could I tell them that I had accepted Jesus as the Son of God, that I had seen heaven and hell, and that my entire understanding of faith had shifted in a matter of moments? They had always been so proud of our traditions, so steadfast in their beliefs. Would they see me as a traitor? Would they cast me out as someone who had abandoned the faith of my ancestors? The questions swirled around me, relentless and overwhelming, but one thought remained clear: I had seen the truth. And the truth was something I couldn't hide, no matter how much fear gripped my heart. It wasn't just for me, it was for them, too. That night, as I lay awake, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I will call my parents. I would begin the conversation. I would share what had happened, what I had experienced, and what I believed now. I had no idea how they would react, but I knew I couldn't keep this burden to myself any longer. I couldn't stay silent when I had been called to speak. And as I closed my eyes, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The fear was still there, but so was a growing sense of purpose. No matter the outcome, I knew that I had to take this step. One step forward into the unknown, with Jesus' words in my heart, "I will be with you always." "Hassan," I began, my voice trembling slightly as I sat across from him, my fingers nervously tracing the edge of the teacup. The warm steam rising from the cup filled the space between us, but it did nothing to ease the tension that had settled in my chest. I could feel the weight of what I was about to say, knowing that once I spoke these words, nothing would be the same. "I need to tell you something. Something that will change everything. It's about what happened when I was in the hospital." Hassan's expression shifted instantly, his concern evident as he lowered his up. "You mean when we thought we'd lost you?" he asked, his voice tight, carrying the raw memory of those terrifying days. It had been touch and go for a while, and I could still see the fear in his eyes from when the doctors had given up hope, the uncertainty that lingered over all of us. I nodded slowly, taking a deep breath, but the words still felt heavy, as if they were caught in the back of my throat. "Yes, but it's so much more than just losing consciousness, Hassan. I didn't just drift away. I went somewhere. I saw something. Someone." His brows furrowed, and for a moment, his entire body seemed to tense, as if bracing himself for something he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. "What do you mean?" His voice was soft, but there was an edge to it now, the kind that comes when someone is trying desperately to understand something beyond their comprehension. His gaze locked with mine, and I could tell that he was already preparing for the unbelievable. I paused, struggling with the enormity of what I was about to share. How could I explain something that I could hardly understand myself? The experience had been so profound, so otherworldly, that trying to put it into words felt impossible. But I owed it to Hassan, I owed it to myself, to speak the truth, no matter how difficult it would be to believe. The memories flooded back, sharp and clear as if they were happening all over again. I don't know how to explain it, but I was aware. It was like I was hovering above myself, watching everything happening below, but I wasn't there. I could feel this incredible light, brighter than the sun, yet it didn't hurt my eyes at all. I could feel it, touch it almost like it was alive. And in that light, I saw things I never imagined possible. Heaven, hell, and then I saw him. Jesus. I saw Hassan's eyes widen at the mention of his name. His face was a study of disbelief, mixed with a touch of fear. But I pressed on, knowing that I couldn't stop now. It wasn't just a vision, Hassan. It wasn't some fleeting image in my mind. It was more real than anything I've ever known. I saw heaven, the gates, the light, the peace. And I saw hell, the darkness, the screams, the pain. But the most incredible part was when I met him. Jesus. He was standing there, waiting for me, and when he spoke to me, it wasn't just words. It was true. He told me about grace. He told me that salvation wasn't something I could earn. It was a gift. And he invited me to follow him. As I spoke, I could see Hassan's face changing, his shock giving way to something else, something deeper. He was trying to reconcile what I was telling him with the man he had known for so long, and I could see the struggle in his eyes. "And what did you say?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost as if he feared the answer. I didn't know what to say at first. I was in awe, Hassan. I didn't understand how this could be happening, how I could be experiencing this. But then, I felt this overwhelming peace, and I just knew. I knew it was real. I knew he was real. And he told me I was loved. He said I was forgiven. The room fell into silence, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Hassan sat there, staring at me as if trying to piece everything together. His mind was racing, processing everything I had just shared. I could see the disbelief in his eyes, but I could also see the flicker of something else. Something soft, something that hinted at the possibility of belief, even if he didn't yet fully understand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Hassan spoke. His voice was low, tinged with skepticism, but I could hear the genuine concern beneath his words. Ahmed, you've always been a man of faith, a man who seeks truth with every fiber of your being. But this is too much. Are you sure this wasn't just some kind of hallucination, some stress-induced dream? You were so close to death, and the mind does strange things when it's under pressure. Maybe you were just imagining it. I couldn't deny that I had thought the same thing. In the days that followed, I had questioned it over and over in my mind. Was this just a figment of my imagination? Could it have all been a result of the trauma my body had gone through? But deep down I knew. This wasn't just a dream. It was real. More real than anything I had ever experienced in my life. I've thought about that, believe me, I said, my voice steady, but my heart was pounding. But this wasn't a dream, Hassan. This was more real than anything. I felt his presence, not in my mind, but in my soul. It was like nothing I've ever felt before. I saw heaven. I saw hell. And I know with every part of me that what he told me is the truth. He looked down, his hands trembling slightly as he folded them together in his lap. I could see the conflict warring within him. He wanted to believe me. He didn't want to see me lost and deluded, but the reality of what I was saying was almost too much to bear. Are you saying that everything we've believed, that everything we've lived by all these years, wasn't the full truth? That the faith we've followed isn't enough? The question hit me like a wave. It was a question that had gnawed at me for days. The truth I had encountered wasn't just a shift in perspective, it was a revelation. No, I said softly, but firmly. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the truth is bigger than we ever realized. Jesus isn't just a prophet, Hassan. He's the Messiah. He's the way to God. Through him, everything changes. Hassan's face paled, and he shook his head, his hands clenched into fists. Ahmed, this could destroy you. You know how people will react. If you share this with anyone, if you tell people what you're saying, you'll be seen as a fool. You'll be rejected. You'll be cast out. I could hear the fear in his voice, the desperation for me to reconsider, to not speak these words aloud. But I knew, deep within my heart, that I couldn't stay silent. The truth had set me free, and I wasn't going to deny it. I know, I whispered. It could ruin everything. My family, my friends, they may turn away from me. But I have to speak the truth. I have to follow this path, even if it means losing everything I know. There was a long pause, and I could see him wrestling with the decision I had made. He knew that my words had the power to inspire, but they also carried the weight of rejection, the weight of isolation. I had felt that myself, deep in my bones. But I also knew, with all the certainty in my being, that Jesus was with me, just as he had promised. As I continued to share my testimony, to speak about the grace that had washed over me, I knew that this wasn't just about my salvation. It was about reaching others, and helping them understand the truth I had found. But the path ahead wasn't easy. It was filled with uncertainty, filled with the possibility of loss. There would be those who would listen with open hearts, and others who would reject me, even condemn me. But no matter what, I would carry this truth forward. I would stand firm in the peace I had found. The hardest part of all came when I told my family, the people I loved most. When I told my parents, their response was one of shock, confusion, and hurt. My father's voice quivered with emotion as he asked, Ahmed, how could you say such things? How could you turn your back on everything we've taught you? On everything we've believed? We raised you to honor our faith. We raised you to live by the teachings of Islam. And now you're telling me that all of that wasn't enough. The pain in his voice cut through me like a knife. But I knew, deep inside, that this was the truth. And no matter how hard it was, no matter how much it cost me, I couldn't turn back now. Because in the end, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone. I had Jesus by my side, and that was enough. And it would always be enough. My heart swelled with emotion as I embraced my younger brother. His hesitant steps toward faith offering a glimmer of hope in a moment that had been filled with doubt and fear. I could feel his uncertainty, but there was something else in his voice. a seed of curiosity that hadn't been there before. His words, though tentative, held a power I couldn't ignore. He was opening his heart to the possibility of something greater than what he had known, and I knew that this was the beginning of his journey, one that I couldn't walk for him, but that I would walk alongside him, as I had once been walked with. "I don't have all the answers yet," he whispered, almost as if speaking to himself. "But there's something about what you said that makes me want to know more. I want to understand it, Ahmed." His words filled me with a deep, peaceful joy. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew that my family, especially my parents, would continue to wrestle with the truth I had found. They loved me deeply, but the chasm between our beliefs seemed impossible to cross at times. But at that moment, I realized that my journey wasn't about forcing anyone to believe as I did. It was about living my truth authentically, with love and patience, and trusting that God would work in their hearts in His own time. That night, I went to bed with a heart full of gratitude. I prayed for my family, my mother, my father, my siblings, all of them. I prayed that God would open their eyes, that they would see His grace the way I had, and that they would come to know Jesus not as a distant figure in a book, but as a living, breathing presence in their lives. The following days were filled with conversations that were both heart-wrenching and encouraging. My mother and father tried to understand, but their pain was palpable. They asked questions that showed their struggle, and their fear of what my decision meant for our family. My father, in particular, was the hardest to reach. His faith was everything to him, and the thought of me walking a different path felt like a betrayal to him. But even in those difficult moments, I could feel the tender tug of God's love in my heart, urging me to remain patient, to continue showing them that I wasn't rejecting their faith, but embracing the fullness of what God had revealed to me. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. It was in those moments of challenge that I found refuge in my new church community. They had welcomed me with open arms, offering not just a place to worship, but a family who understood the isolation and pain that came with leaving one faith for another. There was no judgment, only love. People who had walked similar paths shared their own stories of transformation, of finding grace and truth in Jesus, and their testimonies became a source of strength for me. I started attending Bible study groups where I could dive deeper into my newfound faith. I learned more about the life and teachings of Jesus, about His love, His sacrifice, and the power of His resurrection. Every lesson was a revelation, a piece of the puzzle that had once seemed so impossible to understand. With every passage, with every prayer, my faith grew stronger, and I felt more certain than ever that this was the truth I had been seeking all my life. One Sunday, as I sat in the church listening to the pastor preach, something powerful happened. As he spoke of the love of God, of His desire for all people to come to Him, I felt a deep, profound sense of peace settle over me. It was as if everything I had been through, every question I had asked, every doubt I had harbored, all came together in that moment. I was home. That feeling stayed with me as I returned to my family. They noticed the change in me. It wasn't just the words I spoke, but the peace I carried with me. It was the way I listened more attentively, the way I loved them even when they didn't understand me. I was no longer driven by the need to convince them or prove my faith. I was simply living it, trusting that God would work in their hearts as He had worked in mine. A few months later, my brother came to church with me. He wasn't ready to fully commit, but he was open, and that was enough. I could see the curiosity in his eyes as he listened to the sermon, as he met the people who had become my spiritual family. He asked questions afterward, and we talked for hours about faith, grace, and the nature of God. Over time, I began to see small changes in my parents as well. They didn't immediately embrace the message of Jesus, but they respected my journey, even if they didn't understand it. I could see the wheels turning in their minds, and I knew that God was at work, gently calling them toward Him in His way, in His own time. It wasn't easy. The road was often rocky, filled with moments of doubt, pain, and longing. But with every step I took, I knew I wasn't alone. I had Jesus by my side, guiding me, comforting me, and giving me the strength to continue. And with each passing day, I grew more confident that the truth I had found was not just for me, but for everyone. My family, my friends, and my community. This was a journey I was meant to walk, and though it was difficult, it was also the most beautiful and transformative path I had ever been on. As I looked around at the lives being touched by my testimony, people who had once been indifferent or closed off to the message of Jesus, my heart swelled with hope. The seeds had been planted, and though I may not live to see the full harvest, I knew that God was at work, bringing His love to all who would listen. And so, I continued to share my story, not with the expectation that everyone would understand or accept it, but with the hope that, just as I had been found by grace, others too would come to know the truth of Jesus. His love was endless, and that was a truth I could never deny. And in the end, it was His love that would change the world, one heart at a time. As my journey continued, I found new ways to bridge the divide between my past and my present. I began to use my unique background as a platform to foster understanding between Islam and Christianity. I spoke with those who, like me, had once found themselves amid two worlds, emphasizing the common ground that united these two faiths. In my conversations, I spoke of love, devotion, and the pursuit of truth, values that were central in both religions. But what stood out most to me was how the teachings of the Quran, in many places, pointed to Jesus as the Messiah. I saw the connections that so many had overlooked, the common threads that weaved both stories together. But I also knew that the message of Jesus couldn't be confined within the boundaries of religious doctrine. It wasn't just about religion, it was about relationships. The truth I had come to embrace was not about the rules or rituals of any one faith. It was about a deeply personal connection with God, made possible through the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. It was about grace, unearned, undeserved, but freely given. It was about forgiveness, a love so vast that it transcended everything I had ever understood. That love was different from anything I had ever known. It was a love that accepted me, flaws and all, and called me into a life of transformation. I didn't expect everyone to immediately understand or agree with my journey. I knew that the path I had chosen was difficult, and that many would find it hard to reconcile the truths I now held with the beliefs they had known their entire lives. But I also knew that the call to share Jesus wasn't one I could ignore. It was the call to reveal the love I had found, not to convince or convert, but to open hearts to the possibility that the message of Jesus was real, alive, tangible, and for everyone. Looking back, I can see how God used every part of my life to prepare me for this mission. The struggles, the doubts, the moments of confusion. It all played a part in shaping me into someone who could speak truth with love and humility. I can see now that my journey, with all its challenges, was not random. It was a preparation for something greater. The pain of rejection, the questions I had wrestled with, the loneliness I had sometimes felt, they all pointed me toward the joy of sharing this truth, of seeing the seeds of faith planted in others. The journey hasn't been easy, but in many ways, it's been the most rewarding journey of my life. Every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt, every rejection I faced, none of it compares to the joy of seeing lives transformed by the message of Jesus. I've witnessed people come to know Him in deeply personal ways, some after years of struggle and searching. I've seen people's hearts soften, their perspectives shift, and their lives changed in ways only God can do. As I close this chapter of my story, I want to leave you with this. Seeking the truth takes courage. It takes a willingness to question everything you've known, to step into the unknown, and to trust that God will guide you, even when the path is unclear. But I promise you, it's worth it. The journey isn't always easy, but the peace and joy that come from knowing the truth of Jesus are worth every struggle and every uncertainty. If you've been touched by my story, if something in you has stirred, if you've felt the pull toward something deeper, I encourage you to seek Jesus. Open your heart to Him, and I promise you, He will meet you where you are. It's a journey of discovery, transformation, and love that will change everything. Jesus is real, and He is waiting for you. If you take the first step toward Him, you will never be the same. As we come to the end of this story, I want to take a moment to reflect on everything we've shared. Through my journey, I've learned that seeking the truth, no matter how challenging or unexpected, is the key to true transformation. It's not just about finding answers, it's about embracing grace, love, and a deeper relationship with God that surpasses everything we've known. Now, I want to hear from you. What is one thing you've learned from my journey that you feel inspired to bring into your own life? Maybe it's about having the courage to question the power of grace or the importance of a personal relationship with God. Whatever it is, I encourage you to share it in the comments below. Let's learn from one another and build a community of growth and understanding. If you liked this video and found value in it, please leave your comment below, And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Your support means the world, and I'm excited to continue this journey with you all. Thank you for being a part of this story.